We're counting down the 5 deadliest steam locomotive failures ever built. From shattering boiler blasts to unstoppable mountain runaways and experimental engines that never survived their first day, each disaster reveals a new layer of danger behind steam's power. But which tragedy changed history forever? In the late 1800s, American railroads stretched across the continent, powered by freight locomotives that ran day and night. Inside every engine, a steel boiler held back the force of live steam, sometimes at pressures exceeding 150 pounds per square inch. But early boilers were built from riveted iron plates, joined by hand, and often made from brittle steel. The seams were only as strong as the weakest rivet, and flaws hidden beneath layers of soot and paint could grow with every journey. On a cold morning in 1891, a Baldwin-built freight engine rolled into a bustling yard. As the crew stoked the firebox, pressure inside the boiler climbed. Suddenly, a seam along the crown sheet gave way. In less than a second, superheated water flashed into steam, tearing the boiler apart with a force equal to a small artillery shell. The explosion hurled iron fragments hundreds of feet, shattered windows in nearby homes, and left a crater where the locomotive had stood. Newspaper headlines the next day called it a horrific boiler blast. Engineers killed instantly. Investigators found brittle metal at the point of failure and rivets sheared clean through. The boiler's iron plates, sourced from inconsistent mills, had never been tested for hidden cracks or weaknesses. Survivors described the blast as a thunderclap followed by silence. Inquests blamed poor construction and lack of inspection, fueling public demand for safer standards. Within a decade, new boiler codes required hydrostatic testing, tougher steel, and meticulous inspection of every seam. The cost was measured in lives lost, but the lesson was written in iron and steam. On July 16, 1884, a Midland Railway passenger train raced across Bullhouse Bridge near Penistone, Yorkshire. The air was thick with steam and the clatter of iron wheels. Without warning, the locomotive's leading axle, hidden beneath tons of steel and timber, snapped in two. Decades of relentless pounding had opened an invisible crack deep inside the metal, a flaw no eye could see. In a heartbeat, the engine lurched off the rails, carriages behind jackknifed and tumbled from the bridge, crashing into the valley below. 24 lives were lost, and over 40 more were left injured, their names filling the columns of the Manchester Guardian and the Times in the days that followed. Investigators from the Board of Trade arrived with calipers and notebooks, examining the fractured axle under a gray Yorkshire sky. The report told a story of fatigue, of iron forged in Yorkshire mills, installed more than 20 years before, slowly breaking down with every revolution. The crack had started small, growing along stress lines invisible to routine checks. There were no warning signs, no sounds, no changes in the ride. Only when the metal finally gave way did the disaster reveal itself. Technical diagrams from the inquiry traced the path of the failure, showing how cyclic stress had worked its way through the axle's core. The Board of Trade's findings pushed British Railways to rethink inspection. Axles would now be removed and tested at regular intervals, and engineers began searching for methods to spot cracks before they could spread. The seeds of non-destructive testing, ultrasonic and magnetic techniques were planted in the aftermath, changing how every wheel and axle would be checked for generations to come. December 12, 1917. Deep in the French Alps, a military supply train loaded with hundreds of soldiers and munitions began its descent from Modane toward Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne. The war had stretched every resource thin. Railway crews packed twice the normal number of wooden cars onto a single locomotive, ignoring weight limits in the rush to deliver men and materiel to the front. Most of the cars were old, their brakes worn thin, and only the first few had air brakes. The rest relied on handbrakes and friction alone. As the train wound down the steep grade, the engineer applied the brakes again and again. Heat built up in the brake shoes, sapping their grip until the metal glowed red. The train gathered speed, roaring through mountain tunnels and over stone bridges. Soldiers, packed shoulder to shoulder, felt the cars begin to sway. Some shouted warnings, others clung to their packs. In the darkness ahead, the engineer fought for control, but the brakes had failed. The overloaded cars thundered off the rails and splintered apart, igniting from candles and grenades stowed inside. Flames swept through the wreckage, fueled by wood, spilled oil, and ammunition. Official statements reported 700 dead, but survivor diaries and later investigations suggest the toll may have reached 1,000. French military censors suppressed the full story for years, fearing the impact on morale. Only after the war did the truth emerge in fragments: charred uniforms, lists of missing men, and scorched timetables recovered from the site. The Maurienne disaster forced the army to impose strict limits on train loads, overhaul maintenance schedules, and require air brakes on all troop transports. The lesson was written in ash and iron at a cost counted in hundreds of lives. August 20th, 1941. On the northern ramp of Switzerland's Gotthard railway, a freight train began its descent from Wassen toward Göttingen. The line dropped steeply, a 2.6% grade for miles, twisting through tunnels and across stone bridges. The engineer kept a steady hand on the brake lever, but the train's weight pressed harder with every curve. Cast iron brake shoes, already glowing from friction, faced a relentless test. Each time the brakes clamped down, heat built up on the iron surfaces. At first, the shoes bit into the wheels, slowing the train, but as temperatures soared past 400 degrees Celsius, the iron began to lose its grip. The friction that held back tons of steel and cargo faded away, replaced by the sickening sensation of acceleration. The engineer and crew tried to regain control, but the brakes no longer answered. The train gathered speed, the valley walls echoing with the sound of wheels screaming against the rails. Ahead, a sharp curve waited just beyond a stone bridge. With no way to slow, the locomotive jumped the track, dragging 7 freight wagons into the ravine below. In the aftermath, 4 railwaymen were found among the wreckage, their names later recorded in the Swiss Federal Archives. Official inquiry diagrams charted the gradient and mapped the path of the runaway, pinpointing the moment when thermal brake fade turned a controlled descent into disaster. Investigators measured the charred brake shoes and confirmed what the crew never stood a chance to fight. Prolonged braking on steep grades pushed iron beyond its limits. Within a year, Swiss railways replaced cast iron shoes with manganese copper alloys and installed mandatory air brakes on all mainline freight cars. New rules required cooling stops on every mountain descent and double crews for brake checks. The lesson from the Gotthard ramp was written into every timetable, every brake test, and every mountain journey that followed. In the spring of 1932, a new locomotive stood gleaming on the floor of the North British Locomotive Company's Glasgow workshop. It was billed as the world's most powerful steam engine, a prototype designed to outpace rivals and restore national pride. Blueprints had been revised again and again, each time under mounting pressure from government ministers eager to unveil a symbol of progress before the year's end. Engineers warned of untested high-pressure systems and rushed assembly, but deadlines pushed every concern aside. On the morning of its first trial, dignitaries and reporters gathered on the test track. The locomotive's firebox roared as the pressure gauge climbed, surpassing even the company's own safety margins. Workshop logs later revealed that several weld seams had failed inspection, but repairs were waived to keep the schedule. As the engine's regulator opened, a sudden roar shattered the air. The boiler burst with a force that ripped through the steel shell, sending fragments through the workshop roof and killing 7 men on the floor. The blast wave toppled machines and left a crater where the cab had stood. Within hours, headlines across Britain demanded answers. Parliamentary records showed that a public inquiry convened within days, calling for testimony from engineers, managers, and safety inspectors. The inquiry's final report cited ignored red flags, a lack of phased testing, and unchecked political interference. In the aftermath, new regulations required all experimental locomotives to undergo stepwise trials with independent oversight and mandatory safety reviews. The ambition that fueled the prototype's creation had ended in tragedy, but the reforms that followed set a new standard for railway engineering. The lesson was written in steel and sorrow, a warning against the cost of unchecked ambition. From the first American boiler explosion that set the stage for safety standards, to the catastrophic prototype trial that topped our list, each of these 5 locomotive failures revealed the unforgiving price of ambition and oversight. Across every entry, a pattern emerges. New technology pushed beyond tested limits, whether through brittle metal in a boiler, hidden fatigue in an axle, the crushing demands of war, or the relentless slopes of mountain railways. Yet the most shocking was the prototype's debut disaster, where haste and hubris combined in a single devastating moment. Each tragedy qualified not only by its human toll, but by the sweeping reforms it forced. Boiler codes, fatigue inspections, brake protocols, and prototype testing became the legacy of lives lost. The story of steam locomotives is one of progress paid for in hard lessons. These failures remind us that innovation and risk are inseparable, but every accident rewrote the rules that made travel safer for generations to come.